All right, as promised, we're going to finish up this module of chapters and continue talking about the Mayan and into the Aztecs. There's a great Canopy film. Please check that out in your Moodle shell about the tombs and lost art in the tombs. There's so much to cover with the Mayans. I mean, you can spend an entire semester on them, and it's just really amazing what they do, how they build the ball courts that they create become sort of the ball games that we think of that do lead to sacrifice of the losers. A game that's very much kind of like soccer in that you have to put a ball through a hoop that's on the side of a wall. And you can actually find several YouTube links that still show the game being played as sort of a demonstration. But it's very interesting. And with the Mayans, I was going to talk about sort of the idea of like bloodletting and some of the imagery that we see from it. This image here, like many Mayan, actually have the Mayan language all around it, which can be deciphered. We do have sort of a codex of that. The YouTube link does a great job of talking about this as well. And this is one panel of several that talks about Lady Ox and her sort of hallucination and from bloodletting. And so what we can see here that's going on is we sort of have this like serpentine figure that then, this kind of, that mouth opens up and a warrior comes out. We have Lady Ox herself. And usually there is either like a slashing. We can see all the sort of the marks on the wrist here, which maybe is decoration, but it also could be the wounds themselves. But in a previous panel of this same scene, we know that she was taking what is a rope that is full of pieces of obsidian glass and sharp objects and piercing the tongue and then running the rope with all those sharp objects that open the wound up more and letting the blood sort of flow out. The idea, as any medical expert knows, that if you lose enough blood, you have sort of a hallucinations, right? Or you kind of go into shock. And what they would do, and this was for Mayan rulers, this is sort of a part of their job, in their job description, is that they would do these bloodletting ceremonies, whether you're male or female, and you would then have these visions that would help sort of interpret for the people what they should do, right, on a decision or moving forward. And they would usually be put in sort of a dark chamber, and then the bloodletting would happen, and they would be alone in the dark with losing lots of blood, and then sort of reemerge, maybe even a day or two later, and be able to talk and interpret these visions. So it's very, very interesting. But they did this because the idea is that in their mythology, that the sun god who gets sort of slayed, his blood or rays of the sun, right, are being spread across the earth, and without that blood or those sun rays, right, the crops and stuff wouldn't grow, specifically corn. And so the god of the sun and god of the corn are actually the same, and sort of that idea that he died and there's a resurrection every day, every night. And so there's the sacrifice that the gods give for us so we can live. So therefore we must then sacrifice. So to show our appreciation, we have to give blood back as a thank you. So we see that in Mayans, and we see it again with Aztecs. And the Aztecs have a similar sort of step pyramid structures, and their temples, usually at the top, is where their sacrifices would be held. It was very common to take a blade, usually once again of obsidian, and open up the chest of a living, whether it was a slave or a capture victim, or sometimes even someone from the community who was very specific, right? Because this is actually kind of an honor for some. And we do see actually like mass graves of young virgin women or of children. We've seen that they've had that. So there's, depending on what is needed, that's what they take. But they'll open up the chest and remove the heart, right? The heart's set aside, and the bloodletting. But so that's very common. But the Aztecs, of course, are destroyed by the Spanish when they come in. And the reason why we have some of these actual artifacts is because Spanish were taking them and sending them back to Spain. So we have this feathered shield beautiful feathered shield, showing vivid colors collected from different birds around and this is sent back. So we have some ideas of actual artifacts from them. From Middle America, if we move south, right, the biggest site would probably be Machu Picchu from the Incas, and the YouTube link will explain a whole lot more on why they built on such high plateaus. The Incas are amazing in that they had the largest road network in the Americas until the 1950s, when the United States built the interstate system. So the Spanish actually said that they would have had a harder time defeating these people if they wouldn't have made such great roads. So these roads are still used today, whether they're footpaths, but they traverse all over. And what's really kind of interesting about these people is that the roads from South America they can be found in links that make it to Middle America, and Middle America all the way into Western United States. So we do know that all of these people had communication with each other on some level. We see artifacts from every civilization used as trade goods throughout all of the North, Middle, and South America. And that's probably the biggest point that I can stress, is that these were not isolated groups. These were not naive. These were highly sophisticated groups of people that built not only amazing architectural structures, but also networks that allowed them to communicate and sort of live with one another. In North America, we don't have as much of the early Native American art because of the materials, once again, that it was used with. And by the time the Spanish come up up into the western part of the United States, and of course, when settlers start coming in about the 1500s, a lot of these older artifacts have just been gone, and so most examples that we have we'd consider them a little bit more modern, a little bit more contemporary. They were, usually resourceful, using all sorts of materials for their beadwork and such. And that canopy film, the Native Americans, especially episode 1, is really good sort of identifying all the materials and mediums that they used. Also in North America, we do see in contemporary with these a lot of hide paintings, or even here in Montana, it's very easy to come across what's called ledger drawings. And ledger drawings actually became popular because of the Trail of Tears, and you'd have Native Americans that were imprisoned, and so they would some would be able to procure these ledger pages and draw on them. And so the earliest ledger drawings talk of the Trail of Tears and such, and they're quite impactful. But now that medium has kind of become something that's very much a part of Native American tradition now, and contemporary art is ledger drawings. Some of the oldest parts of the United States are actually in the West. They're not in the East. For example, Mesa Verde, which if you've ever got the chance to go to that national park, you'll see some of the largest cliff dwellings really in the world, but in the United States for sure. And this is a part of a group of people, the Anasazi people, which is kind of a derogatory term. The Hopi is maybe even a little bit more appropriate, but the people that were there did develop these sophisticated cities that could house several hundred people, and they had what was called a kiva structure, and that's what you see sort of around here. And the kiva is links back to the myth that man comes from the earth, that we crawl out of the earth through an opening in the earth and then sort of like spread across the surface of the earth. And so ceremonially they build their kivas down into the ground, and these become homes, but they also are sort of a place of worship, if you can imagine sort of like living in your church. And that kiva would have a central portal above that would allow you to have a ladder that goes from the subterranean level to the upper level. But you'd cook, you'd sleep, everything in these kivas. And so we see a link between a lot of the Southwest cultures because of that kiva structure. I highly recommend taking the trip this summer if you can, down to the Four Corners area and seeing some of these ruins. They're very, very beautiful. The Mongol culture, um, also very interesting because we see some beautiful ceramic pieces from them, but we also see these ceremonial puncture marks, or what was called killing the vessel. A lot of times, these pieces are found with the bowl placed over the face of the person buried with a hole in there. So there must be something about sort of the spiritual nature of this hole that maybe allows for the spirit to either enter or exit the body. Maybe it creates sort of a kiva-like structure over their face. Maybe it's also sort of their ceremonial bowl, but very interesting stuff. And I put some films on your Moodle shell to check out about that. So that finishes up chapter 20. In the next module, we'll be looking more at sort of the Western modern art that we know of, and Impressionist style, and moving into, the early 1900s. Go through these notes. A lot of the stuff will be on your final test. Thank you.